Today, we're going to unpack one of the most incredible turnarounds in modern history. We're talking about how the United States went from being completely on its knees to the top of the world in just 15 years. It is an absolutely wild story of crisis, reinvention, and ultimately global war. I mean, just think about that question for a second. How does a country go from having nationwide breadlines, millions of people out of work, to becoming the global superpower? It feels impossible, right? But that's exactly what happened. So let's trace the steps of this mind-blowing transformation. To really understand this meteoric rise, we have to start at rock bottom. And I mean rock bottom. Back in 1929, America was facing this double whammy of a crisis. Its economy was completely collapsing at home, and at the same time, it was absolutely determined to just ignore the rest of the world's problems. Yeah, this quote from President Harding just nails the mood after World War I. Listen to that phrase, not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality. Americans were just so done with European wars. They basically wanted some national me time. So Harding's promise of a return to normalcy was exactly what they wanted to hear. But that whole idea of normalcy, well, it turned out to be a total house of cards. The Roaring '20s came to a screeching halt on Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. It was a perfect storm, really. You had a stock market that was dangerously bloated from speculation. People were borrowing tons of money to buy stocks they couldn't actually afford. At the same time, farms and factories were cranking out more stuff than people could possibly buy. And to top it all off, these massive tariffs, like the Hawley-Smoot tariff, had basically paralyzed international trade. The entire system just broke. So, with the economy in shambles, that just doubled down on the country's foreign policy, which was pure isolationism. And you got to understand, this wasn't just a policy on a piece of paper, it was a deep national feeling, born from the trauma of World War I. The thinking was pretty simple. Hey, our problems are here at home, and there's a giant ocean between us and Europe's problems. But right in the middle of all this despair, a new leader comes onto the scene with a totally different idea. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, promised action. And his New Deal was about to change the relationship between the American government and its people forever. And you can see the difference right here. It's like night and day. President Hoover, he started with this very hands-off, laissez-faire approach. He basically thought the economy would sort itself out. Well, the result was misery, symbolized by those shanty towns people bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles. Roosevelt, he was the exact opposite. He promised massive government intervention, creating all these programs to provide a basic safety net, turning the U.S. into what we'd call a limited welfare state. So how in the world did he plan to tackle a crisis this big? Well, Roosevelt was a brilliant communicator. He boiled his entire complex plan down to something simple and memorable for everyone, the 3 R's. First up, relief, getting immediate help to people who are suffering. Second, recovery, restarting the engines of business and farming. And third, maybe the most important, reform, fixing the system so a disaster like this could never, ever happen again. And that reform part, wow, did it have a lasting impact? I mean, look at these. The FDIC that insures the money in your bank account, the SEC that regulates the stock market, and of course, Social Security. All of them are New Deal programs. They are fundamental parts of American life that are still around today. Okay, so while America was looking inward, trying to fix this massive crisis at home, an even bigger one was brewing across the oceans. The rise of these aggressive totalitarian governments in Europe and Asia started to seriously challenge America's whole leave us alone attitude. This timeline just shows this relentless march toward war. It's one thing after another. Americans are watching all this, getting more and more worried, as Japan, Italy, and Nazi Germany just start taking whatever they want. Every move made it harder to stay isolated, until finally, that last one, September 1939, Hitler invades Poland and World War II begins. So what were the other countries doing? Well, the first response from the European democracies was a policy we now call appeasement. The hope was that if they just gave Hitler a few of the things he wanted, like parts of Czechoslovakia, maybe, just maybe, they could avoid another catastrophic war. It turned out to be a complete and total failure. Now, President Roosevelt, he could see the writing on the wall. He knew this was a huge danger, but he had a major problem. The American public was still fiercely isolationist.
So he had to do this delicate dance, this really slow pivot away from total neutrality. His goal was to find ways to help Great Britain without officially dragging America into another war.
And Roosevelt's pivot was just a series of really clever, gradual steps. First, there was cash and carry, basically saying, okay, Britain, you can buy our weapons, but you have to pay cash and use your own ships. Then came the destroyers for bases deal, where we traded some old warships for access to military bases. And the biggest step of all was the Lend-Lease Act. That pretty much gave Britain an open line of credit for war supplies. With that, the U.S. became the arsenal of democracy, and let's be honest, true neutrality was over. And then, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, everything changed in an instant. The surprise attack by Japan on the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii killed over 2,400 Americans. Any lingering debate about isolationism was just obliterated. It was gone. The attack thrust the nation directly into World War II, and there was absolutely no turning back. So now America's in the war. And that meant mobilizing the entire country on a scale that had never been seen before. This was what's known as a total war. That means every single part of American society, from the factories to the families at home, was now part of the war effort.
And if you want to understand how big this was, just look at this number, a 1,000% increase in federal spending. That same government spending that FDR started with the New Deal, it went into absolute hyperdrive for the war. And that massive industrial boom is what finally, once and for all, ended the Great Depression.
This whole mobilization completely transformed society too. You had Rosie the Riveter becoming this national icon as millions of women poured into factory jobs. You had the WWII campaign, where African Americans fought for two victories, one against fascism overseas and one against racism right here at home. But there was a much darker side to all this. Executive Order 9066 led to the forced internment of over 100,000 Japanese Americans, based on nothing more than fear and prejudice. And here's the truly sobering part. The official justification for this came from the highest court in the land. In the case Korematsu v. United States, the Supreme Court actually sided with the government. They called this huge violation of civil rights a martial necessity. It's a really stark reminder of that constant tension between national security and individual freedoms. But despite all the challenges at home and the brutal fighting abroad, the American war machine, fighting alongside its allies, just pushed relentlessly toward victory. And in the process, it forged a completely new role for the United States on the world stage. Just think about the scale of this thing. The U.S. was fighting a massive war on two opposite sides of the planet. In Europe, the huge turning point was the D-Day invasion of Normandy, the biggest amphibious assault in all of history, which eventually led to the liberation of France. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the strategy was called island hopping, this long, brutal campaign to capture key islands one by one to cut off Japan's supply lines. And if you want to see the complete 180-degree turn in American foreign policy, this is it. After World War I, the U.S. famously refused to join the League of Nations, which ended up being a failure. But after World War II, the U.S. was one of the main architects and a founding member of the much stronger United Nations, signaling a full commitment to global leadership. The isolationism was gone. So here's a big takeaway. By 1945, while most of Europe and Asia were literally in ruins, the United States stood almost completely alone. Its cities were intact, its factories were booming, and its economic and military power were unmatched. That 15-year transformation was complete. America was now, without a doubt, a superpower. But here's the thing. Becoming a superpower isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. And that brings us to our final big question. Now that you're on top, what's next? With its old enemies defeated, what new struggles, what new responsibilities, and what new adversaries, like, say, the Soviet Union, would America have to face as it stepped into this brand new role as leader of the post-war world? Well, that is a story for another time.